Welcome to Hub History, where we go far beyond the Freedom Trail to share our favorite stories from the history of Boston, the hub of the universe. This is episode 180, Ghosts and Shadows of Automobile Row, with Ken Liss. Hi, I'm Jake. This week, Ken Liss is going to tell us about an era when Comm Ave in Allston was the epicenter of the automotive business in Boston. In the early 20th century, car dealerships, tire companies, parts distributors, and other related businesses lined what was known as Automobile Row, a sort of urban forefather of the suburban auto mile. Ken's going to tell us what made these early dealerships special, who some of the personalities behind Automobile Row were, and where you can see traces of this history today. Ken is the president of the Brookline Historical Society, and he writes and speaks frequently on local history. Like our guest last week, and our guest next week, Ken was scheduled to speak at History Camp Boston on March 14th, before the pandemic forced it to move to July. But before we talk about the car business on Comm Ave, it's time for this week's Boston Book Club selection and our upcoming historical event. Our pick for the Boston Book Club this week is The Forgotten Aquariums of Boston by Jerry Ryan. Originally published in 1995, this slim volume is a history of the aquariums in Boston that preceded today's magnificent New England Aquarium. It mostly focuses on the several incarnations of the Boston Aquarial Gardens, which opened in April 1859. The preface to the third edition points out that just 85 years after Paul Revere's famous ride, an entirely different kind of ride was taking place in the heart of Boston's downtown crossing. This ride was performed by a woman seated in a nautilus-shaped boat being pulled by a beluga whale through the largest tank in the first aquarium in the United States. If you think that's incredible, then keep reading. You're about to unravel a complicated story featuring a brilliant inventor, named Cutting, and an infamous showbiz entrepreneur, named Barnum, who managed to circulate 600,000 gallons of seawater from Boston Harbor to Boston Common without electricity. The story begins with banjo-playing, gun-toting harbor seals, proceeds through a den of serpents, and, without giving too much away, features a tragic one-way trip to an asylum. And the story doesn't stop there. The book recounts how P.T. Barnum gradually transformed Boston's original aquarial gardens into more of a zoo, before seizing control and turning it into one of his variety shows, featuring attractions like General Tom Thumb and the Fiji Mermaid. Then, 50 years after Barnum's aquarium closed up shop, the book covers a new aquarium based in South Boston, and how that venture helped spawn today's New England Aquarium. The book's heavily illustrated with historic photos, documents, illustrations, advertisements, and more, and the whole thing runs to about 75 pages, not counting appendices. The best part is that it's available to download as a free PDF from the New England Aquarium website, so you don't have to wait for the library to reopen or for Amazon to deliver. You can start reading today. Does this spring of social distancing have you missing sports? Well, you're in luck then. Our first virtual event this week is a session with Red Sox historian Gordon Eads, thanks to the Massachusetts Historical Society. Bring your questions about the Sox and baseball to this unique event. The MHS says, join Red Sox historian Gordon Eads in a virtual Q&A, where he'll take your questions on one of baseball's most legendary and celebrated franchises. Subscribers will get access to a curated list of videos from the MHS program archive to watch at home. This content will help viewers engage with the Red Sox lore ahead of the question and answer session. The event's free, but advanced registration is required. After you register, you'll get the link to join the webinar, as well as links to the videos to review in advance. And I know it's hard to believe that it's already April, but that's what happens when the whole society stays indoors for a month. With April comes Patriots' Day, one of the most important dates on Boston's revolutionary calendar. For many families, the reenactment on Lexington Green is a treasured part of their Patriots' Day tradition. But of course, large gatherings like that are verboten these days. Luckily, the Lexington Historical Societies decided to take Patriots' Day online. They have a whole series of events planned from April 18th to the 20th. The whole thing starts out with a portrayal of Deborah Sampson, who dressed as a man to serve in the Continental Army. On Saturday, April 18th, Judith Calora of History at Play will transform herself first into Deborah Sampson and then into Robert Shirtliff, the name under which she enlisted in the Continental Army. On Sunday the 19th, children's author Jenny L. Coate will explain what happened on the original Patriots' Day by reading selections from her book, The Declaration, the Sword, and the Spy. The highlight comes on April 20th, when the famous battle on Lexington Green will be reenacted not on Lexington Green, but instead on your computer screen. Many of us know the story of the Battle of Lexington, that the plucky band of local militia faced off against the mighty British Army on the town common on April 19, 1775. But what actually happened on the battle green that day, and how did we get to that point? Join the Lexington Historical Society for a deeper dive into the story of that day as they show their award-winning short film, First Shot, The Day the Revolution Began. Following this viewing, local reenactors with experience recreating the battle will be available to answer your questions about the history of the battle, the context of the Revolutionary War, and what it's like to step back in time and relive the past. Rounding off the program will be a performance by Diane Taraz, founder and leader of the Lexington Historical Society Colonial Singers. What will it be like to watch Patriots' Day unfold on a laptop screen? Check out this week's show notes at hubhistory.com/180 for the links you need for that, as well as a link to Forgotten Aquariums of Boston, this week's Boston Book Club pick. Hey listeners, this is Jake of the Future from the editing room, just pointing out that in this next sequence, I refer to Josh Clark of the Stuff You Should Know podcast as Jock, and I apologize for that. Before I bring in Ken Liss, I just want to pause for a moment. It's been funny to watch all our favorite shows make the transition to social distancing. Late-night talk show hosts first did their monologues in empty theaters, then from their living rooms and backyards.
Only people in the audience right now are some members of my staff. Hi, guys. I'm gonna sit down over here. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hey, everybody. Hi. Welcome to my bathroom. I'm your host, Stephen Colbert. You're watching a very special social distancing edition of The Late Show, or as I now call it, The Lather Show with Scrub and Colbert.
CNN correspondents have been giving updates from their basements.
A lot of news. CNN tonight, D. Lemon on top of all of it, as always.
What's going on today? Something's different about your set.
Is it?
Yeah. Where's your suit?
I've worked on this hard.
Even big-time podcast hosts like Jock and Chuck of Stuff You Should Know, or Ira Glass of This American Life, are having to adjust to bringing the studio home.
I think everyone knows right now that we are now set up to record apart from one another.
Yes, Chuck.
So my first question before we have to get serious is, what are you wearing?
I knew it.
We have all been holed up in our own homes. Everybody on the staff. We are one of the many businesses that have decided that it's safer for everybody if we're working from home.
For us small-time indie podcasters, not much has changed. If I sound different this week, it's because I'm not recording in my usual space. I mean, pandemic or not, I'm still usually podcasting from the same improvised vocal booth in the home office, made out of a TV tray and an old moving pad. But since I've been at the desk in that home office all day, every day, for 4 weeks, I decided to mix things up today and go down the hall to the spare room. Listen, my ask is a little bit different this week. America's basically experienced all the job losses of the entire Great Depression within the past month. If you still have a job and you can afford it, support a local history organization you have a connection with or a historic site. Donate to a food pantry, get takeout from a local restaurant, or order a book from a local bookstore. Once you've done all those things, if you still want to support what we do here at Hub History, we appreciate it. To get started, just go to patreon.com/hubhistory or visit hubhistory.com and click on the support link. Thanks a lot. Now it's time for this week's main topic. Ken Liss is the head of instruction for the Boston University Library System, and he's an independent researcher with a strong interest in the history of what was once known as Automobile Row. Ken Liss, I just want to say welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Ken, you're the second of what I'm calling our History Camp refugees. So you were scheduled to speak at History Camp Boston in March. Your topic was going to be the ghosts and shadows of Automobile Row. And then, of course, History Camp got delayed until July, thanks to COVID-19. Can you start out by just explaining where in Boston Automobile Row was and when it was at its peak?
Well, it ran along Commonwealth Avenue from Kenmore Square to more or less Packard's Corner, which is where Commonwealth Avenue makes a big turn to the left and Brighton Avenue continues straight, although some of the Automobile Row businesses and buildings were around the bend or on Brighton Avenue as well, but mainly from Kenmore Square to Packard's Corner. And it started more or less around 1910 and continued to some extent into the 1980s, but really the heyday ended in the 50s and 60s.
So who were some of the car makers who would have been represented on Automobile Row? Were there makes that we wouldn't recognize today?
Oh, so many. One of the things that I learned as I was researching this is how many names and makes and models there were that I'd never heard of before, as well as many that we know very well. So Cadillac and Packard and Pierce Arrow, some that are no longer around but are fairly well known, but others that are still here too, Chevrolet and many, many others.
So if the Automobile Row is really getting rolling around 1910, that can't be the first center of the automotive business in Boston. There was a car industry for at least a few years before that. Where was the where were auto dealers coming from when they moved out to Automobile Row?
Well, initially, a lot of the auto dealers were in existing spaces that were not built specifically for automobile dealerships. But the first kind of center of the automobile trade was something called the Motor Mart in Park Square, which opened in 1906 as a large building that was home to multiple dealers. And that was where Motor Mart still exists. A newer building replaced it in later decades and is still there. Is at a hotel built on top of it. But that was in many ways the first center, the most prominent of the locations where many dealers were gathered.
So if the automobile industry in Boston was centered at first around Park Square, who starts first moving out to Commonwealth Avenue?
Well, the person probably most responsible for the growth of the Commonwealth Avenue Auto Row was Alvin T. Fuller. He wasn't the first, but he brought a new kind of auto dealership that really led to many changes. And he started in his hometown of Malden as a bicycle dealer, later added automobiles in Malden, and then established a business in Park Square before the Motor Mart opened, and then moved into the Motor Mart along with many other dealers. But just 3 years after the opening of the Motor Mart in 1906, in 1909, he announced he was building a new facility on Commonwealth Avenue in Allston at what later became known as Packard's Corner. And that was a very different kind of dealership and really opened up the way for the growth of the new Automobile Row.
And so what makes were Alan Fuller selling at the time?
Well, he sold a number of different cars. Initially, the Packard is what he was most known for. He also sold an automobile known as the Northern. He added Cadillacs at one point as a more affordable alternative to Packard, which is kind of fun. But it was Packards that was mainly what he was known for.
So is Packard's Corner named after the Packard motor car, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, the stories that when I started researching this, I had heard and read in other places that it was called Packard's Corner before he established his business there. There was a man named Packard who had a stable and a riding school, not quite in the corner, but nearby. I've kind of cast some doubt on that. I haven't seen any use of the term until 1941. So I kind of doubt that it was actually named for this other Packard who was indeed in the area. So I think it really was named for the Packard dealership that Fuller established.
Now, I want to come back in just a second and talk more about that dealership. But before I do, what made somebody like Alvin T. Fuller want to move out to Com Ave? Was it simply the fact that it was undeveloped space, or was there something about that area that was fertile ground for auto businesses?
Well, I think the undeveloped space was a big part of it. The taxes were cheaper. It was further out. Some of the buildings, although not the Packard building that he built, some of them on the south side of Commonwealth Avenue were in Brookline, not in Boston. But it was also a place where there was automobile traffic, so it wasn't as crowded as Park Square, and you had people coming by both in automobiles and also on the streetcars, so that the showrooms that were built along Commonwealth Avenue had a lot of traffic where their wares could be seen. So that was a big part of it as well.
Now, you mentioned showrooms, and you talked about Alvin Fuller's Packard dealership being pretty unique. And for most of us, when I think about buying my last car, I went out to the suburbs, out to the current Auto Mile in Norwood, and went to a big paved parking lot that had hundreds of, in my case, Subarus parked on it. And then a small building sort of at the corner where you would go in and talk to a salesman, talk to the finance person, try not to get ripped off too badly. But it sounds like the car dealerships of this period on Automobile Row on Com Ave are very different from what we picture most car dealerships being like today.
They really were. They were really showcases and showrooms, and part of that was as the automobile was still relatively new, that people wanted assurance of quality, of luxury, of stability. With so many car companies, they wanted to be sure that the company would continue to be around. So the facilities had showrooms with large plate glass windows where you could see the cars, but they were much more than that. They were really full-service facilities with elaborate architecture. The Packard building was designed by an architect named Albert Kahn, who was quite a well-known architect. He did a lot of work for Henry Ford, including the famous River Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan, and many others. It was said in the 1930s that about 1/5 of the industrial buildings in the U.S. had been designed by Albert Kahn, and he designed this building. It had a park adjacent to the building that was 350 feet by 190 feet with elm trees, oak trees, maple trees, and iron fence. Cars would drive through the park to the car entrance. It was really different than anything that had been done. And the interior of the showroom had 28-foot high ceilings, mahogany chairs and tables. There was a telephone exchange, bathrooms, a mezzanine where the office workers were all stationed. So those were the kinds of things that the customers would see. But there was much, much more, because it was really the building, it was said, had 256 skilled mechanics. There was a stock room with parts for every Packard and Cadillac model ever built. They didn't build the cars there, but it was said they had enough parts to put one together. There were body shops, a blacksmith, a fabric shop, a machine wash, a car wash. In some of the luxury cars in those days, they would change the bodies in winter and summer, and they'd bring them there to be changed. So they would shift the body from the winter body to the summer body. And it was said the top floor could work on 75 cars at a time. There were 2 large dining rooms, one for the office workers and one for the mechanics. So it was really a full-service center that wouldn't have been possible in the early showrooms that were made in buildings that had other purposes, and not even really in the Motor Mart.
It's interesting. You've mentioned the Rouge River plant in Michigan, and that you always picture trees and iron ore coming in one end of that and a Model T rolling out the other end. And it sounds like some of the businesses, some of the dealerships along Com Ave were almost the retail version of that, with everything housed under one roof.
Yes, they really were full service operations. Fuller was successful enough that within 7 years, he expanded and built a second wing for trucks and used cars, and later enclosed the front too. So this building was a major expansion of what he had in Park Square, and the building itself was expanded 2 times and really provided a lot of full service for everybody.
After Packard, what were the other early car manufacturers to have a presence on Automobile Row?
Well, some of the others that came very soon in the wake of Packard's innovation were at the other end, at the Commonwealth, the Kenmore Square end, the Kenmore Square end of Automobile Row, in buildings that are still there today. And there were Peerless Auto and I'm trying to remember the names of the other ones there, but there were several that were there at the same time. And these two were large, full-service buildings. One of those buildings where Peerless Auto is the building that now has the Citgo sign on top of it. And while the building to the west of it has been torn down, that building and the two former auto dealerships that were next to it are still there, and as I understand it, are going to remain.
Was Automobile Row just car dealers, selling you a finished automobile, or were there other automotive-related businesses along that strip?
There were a lot of automotive-related businesses, tires and parts, and many other kinds, and again, lots of other deals that filled in that space between Kenmore and Packard's Corner as well. Many of which are now buildings used by Boston University, where I work. So. And in the, I believe it was in the 1930s, it was said there were as many as 117 auto-related businesses along Commonwealth Avenue.
Is that roughly when the number of businesses would have peaked, do you think?
I think so, yeah.
Just to help me sort it out in my mind, we're not talking about manufacturing automobiles on the Automile or the Automile, on the Automobile Row or on ComAv, right? We're talking more retail.
Right. These were retail. There was just across what's now the BU Bridge in Cambridge. There was a Ford factory where cars were actually built, but not in any of the ones along Commonwealth Avenue. They were some of them were kind of central distributorships. So part of the reason they were so large is that automobiles of different makes would be sent there from the factories and then distributed to dealerships around New England. So one of the buildings that came a little bit later, that's another of probably equally impressive to the Packard building, is the building that's now the College of Fine Arts at Boston University, and was a Buick dealership that opened in 1920, and it was opened by a man named Harry Noyes, who began as he had a Buick dealership in Lowell, and he then took over a building that had been a stable owned by an African-American businessman named Henry Turner. That Turner got into automobiles briefly, but then in 1909, it was taken over by Buick. Noyes then took it over. And in 1920, he built this building that's now the College of Fine Arts that, like the Packard building, was a full-service building. And he was the leading distributor of Buicks in New England through the 1940s. The building was bought by Boston University in the 1960s, and this is one of the more fascinating buildings. One of the reasons I called my earlier talk on this Ghosts and Shadows is there are remnants of these buildings, and this building on the first floor, in the building that the space that has been an art gallery for the College of Fine Arts, has probably the most fun of all the Ghosts and Shadows. There are some Corinthian columns inside this space and a grand staircase, and at the tops of the columns are gargoyle-like figures that are actually auto mechanics.
That's great. So you say Harry Noyes started creating this Buick empire in the 1920s and was certainly active, sounds like, through the 1940s. I'm just old enough that I can remember before every car on the road was a Toyota. Old enough to remember coming out of a store one day and somebody left a note on our family car saying, "Buy American, a-hole." When did foreign car manufacturers start to have a presence on Automobile Row?
I think they came much, much later. I can't say for certain, but I believe it was more like the 1960s. And I think it may have given a little bit of a late surge to Auto Row. One of the dealers who was selling foreign cars at that point was Peter Fuller, who was the son of Alvin T. Fuller. And he had taken over a later building, which we definitely should talk about, which is the Fuller Cadillac building right by the BU Bridge. But by the 60s, he was also selling foreign cars further west on Commonwealth Avenue.
So it sounds like the foreign cars started to move in just sort of at the tail end of the heyday, before the decline of Automobile Row.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways the decline sort of started after World War II, and especially in the 50s, as some of the growth of the suburbs and the car buying public was moving out to the suburbs, and even some of the Commonwealth Avenue auto dealers started displaying their cars in parking lots on Commonwealth Avenue, and that became kind of more what we have today, where you drive in and there are just lots of cars parked in a big parking lot. So the big showrooms with the glass windows were kind of fading away. So I think the growth of the foreign dealerships kind of gave a little maybe extended Auto Row for a little while.
Now, I want to circle back to the comment you just made about Fuller's Cadillac dealership. So what made that business distinct from his Packard business?
Well, I think probably with the changes in the fortunes of the different automobile companies, maybe some consolidation with General Motors and others, and fewer automobile companies. He, in 1928, had the Fuller Cadillac Olds building built, also designed by Albert Kahn. It was actually built by the Cadillac company for Fuller, and like the Packard building, it was really a full-service building, and it's he sold. Whereas initially he introduced Cadillacs as the lower-priced alternative to Packards, here he was selling Cadillacs as the higher-priced and Oldsmobiles as the lower-priced. But it was very similar in the way it worked, in that it had sales departments and service departments. It had and still has a ramp that goes over the 5 floors of the building that was wide enough for 2 cars, so cars could be going in both directions and past one another, going up and down. The building is now owned by Boston University. I've walked those ramps. There are a lot of student art projects that take place in that building, and there's the detritus of a lot of the art projects that fill some of those ramps. But there are still signs saying "Don't walk on ramps" and other clear indications of its past.
That right off the bat gives, to me, a picture of how different the dealerships along Com Ave were than what we're used to in sort of the suburban auto mile today. That the simple fact that it's a multi-story building with different elements of the dealership happening on each floor. When you think, again, we're usually used to seeing a single story or maybe 2-story building surrounded by a large open area full of cars. So it's a very different visual of what a car dealership would have looked like at the time.
Yeah, I think so. I think the car buying experience was different. I don't know at what point car dealers got their reputation as being shady and not trustworthy, and I don't know that that was necessarily different in the days of the big showrooms, but certainly the experience was a different kind of experience, and of course, you know, in 1910, when the Packard building was built, and probably even in 1928, not everybody had a car, so it was a different kind of experience. The buyers were different as well as the sellers.
Yeah, it's a more exclusive experience, I guess, at the time.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because the few storefront dealerships I can think of that still exist tend to be boutique, Aston Martin or something. These really unique imports where they are still cultivating that sort of boutique exclusive experience that sounds like any car buyer would have had at the time.
And there are still a few dealerships just past Packard's Corner There is
Herb Chambers out there.
Herb Chambers is out there. He has 3 different dealerships. He's got I believe it's a Honda, a Toyota, and the third one is one that they recently tore down the building and are they're building a new building, which at first I thought, they're probably turning it into apartments, but I've been told that no, it's going to be another dealership. It's an Audi. I think it's an Audi dealership.
Yeah, so a little bit of that old auto row tradition still happening in pretty much the same spots. That's nice to see.
Yep. And there are a few. There's Sullivan Tire. There's some auto parts stores still on what was Automobile Row.
So at some point, we have to talk about the inevitable decline of Automobile Row. But before we get to that, I want to talk about another one or two of the landmarks. You also already mentioned the Chevron sign that's in Kenmore Square today. But back in the day...
Citgo sign. Yep.
Yes, a Chevron sign. Yes, you mentioned the landmark Citgo sign that's in Kenmore Square today. Back in the day, there was another giant neon petroleum sign very nearby, a big Shell sign.
There was. This was not so much an auto dealership, but the building pretty much right next to what's now the BU Bridge was a Shell service station and the New England headquarters for the Shell Oil Company. And on its roof, it had a large neon Shell sign that faced in both directions, east and west along the Charles River. And the building still stands. It's now the Boston University Academy, a private high school. And there are kind of shell motifs along the outside of the building that I had never noticed until I started researching this. But the Shell sign itself is no longer there, but one half of it still exists. It was moved across the Charles River to a Shell station on Memorial Drive in Cambridge, where it still stands today.
Okay, I was going to ask if that was the same sign, because I see that sign. If I go to Micro Center.
Yep, I've been there too. Yep.
Yeah, I see a Shell sign that I wondered if it was the same one.
Yeah, that's the same one, although only half of it. I don't know if it was the western-facing half or the eastern-facing half. But it's only one half. And there are a few other remnants that are left. One of the longtime dealerships was Commonwealth Chevrolet, which actually occupied 2 different buildings, both still standing. One of them is now the Star Market near Packard's Corner. And when I was first researching this, as I walked by that building, there was an iron fence with these brick fence posts, and there was a symbol on all of these fence posts, a metal symbol of it looked like a tire with an arrow going through it. And I looked at that and I said, I bet I know what that is. And sure enough, that building was originally a dealership for the Pierce Arrow automobile company.
Huh. So that's the Star Market that's right on Com Ave.
Exactly.
Right near the split. Huh. That's something I just learned. Are there other places, businesses or campus buildings that you can go into today where you can see visible remnants of old automotive businesses?
There are a few. You may not recognize them as remnants of auto businesses, but they are. And there was kind of a fun one that I just came across recently. I have a photograph of a Rio dealer, REO, which is another old automobile, which I've learned more about. People who know more about cars will laugh at me for my lack of knowledge on some of the old dealerships. But first of all, I learned that Rio is named for, and I'm forgetting his first name, but his middle initial is E and his last name is Olds. He was the founder of Oldsmobile, and he later formed the Rio and gave it his name. And on the window of this building in this picture, one of the models they were selling was the Speedwagon, the REO Speedwagon, which they gave the name of a band. But the picture is there's this beautiful staircase leading up to a balcony. And I hadn't given too much thought to it until I recently saw an article that Brookline was getting its first Taco Bell in a long time. And it was going to be in a building along Commonwealth Avenue. And it's going to be different than most Taco Bells. It's going to be table service. And I looked at the building, and realized that it's the same building, and it had, I think, most recently been a 7-Eleven, and at least part of it. And when I went by, that staircase is in there with a balcony. So I have this great picture of this very elegant looking place, and now it's kind of a construction site, but I went in and talked to some of the workers and got some pictures of it. And, this staircase that not quite as elegant as the Packard building, but like the Packard building and the Noyes building, had kind of a mezzanine where some of the office workers were. This had one too, and now it's going to be a Taco Bell, but the staircase is still there.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that one of these dealerships had columns with essentially gargoyles, but gargoyles of mechanics. Which building was that originally?
That was the Noyes Buick building, the one that's now the College of Fine Arts.
And
by the way, BU has been doing some major renovation on that building, and one of the things that they're doing is the storefront windows along Commonwealth Avenue had been filled in, and they've opened them up and put glass back in, and they've cleaned up the gargoyles and the space and the grand staircase and much more. I'm looking forward to when it's open again and when we can actually go in there again, when we can leave our homes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going in anywhere again.
Yes.
So that raises an interesting point. A lot of the buildings, the physical buildings that used to be part of the automotive industry on Com Ave, are now part of the BU campus. And I don't have a clear picture of how much of that is direct competition between BU and the car industry, and how much of that is just BU picking up properties as they became available. Is there any relation between the decline of the car business and the growth of the BU campus, or is it just purely coincidence?
No, I don't think so. I think it really came later. Some of those buildings were acquired by BU. Some are still like the building where the Rio dealership was. That's going to be a Taco Bell. Is not owned by BU. Some of the BU owned buildings are given over to retail space, and some of them are used by BU as buildings. And certainly between the BU Bridge and Kenmore Square, there are a number of buildings there that are classroom buildings and labs that were auto dealerships. And I was waiting to go into a class in one of the buildings a few months ago, and just kind of waiting for the previous class to come out. And I noticed this column that just had a very industrial look to it, and I realized it was part of the old building. I also see in some of these classroom buildings there are these very wide elevators, some of which I don't think are used anymore, but they were wide because they were used to move automobiles.
That is truly a ghost or shadow of Automobile Row.
It really is. So,
is there anything you wish I had asked about in more detail before we start moving toward a conclusion?
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting is the Fuller building, which I mentioned the ramps and various other things, but the first floor, which was the showroom, has recently been redesigned and actually opened up to the second floor as something called the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground. And this is the Thurman Center. Howard Thurman was from the School of Divinity. He was a mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King when Dr. King studied at BU, and a big influence on him and his philosophy of nonviolence, resistance, and protest. And the Thurman Center, which has been in the basement of the student union in a small space, does a lot of work to kind of foster common ground, how people can come together and think about and talk about issues. And that first floor and much of the second floor has been turned into a new space for the Thurman Center that is quite beautiful. It really just opened a few months ago. I've gone in there to take some pictures of spaces that I have old pictures of, including I have one picture of looks like it's from the early 60s, of a Cadillac on the floor, and I got a picture more or less of the same space, more or less from the same angle. And while it looks very different, you can definitely see the floor. It's got a sort of an ornate floor, and that is still there, still visible. And a few other things. There's a picture of Alvin Fuller in his 80s, so I think that would probably be in the 1950s, with an automobile in front of an elevator, and that space is now a kitchen for the Thurman Center, but you can still see the elevator and the little alcove where he was standing is still there. So just kind of, I mean, that's one of the things that I've always found intriguing about history and historical places, that places change, but you know that they're the same place, and that something, whether it's a Civil War battlefield or a protest march, took place in a space that you're standing in. And while I wouldn't put an auto dealership in the same category as either of those, just knowing that you're standing in the same space that was used for a different purpose gives me a little chill sometimes. So,
I'm not originally from the Boston area. I'm from deepest Appalachia, and so it took years for me to adjust after moving here to just being able to go and stand on the site of the Boston Massacre, on the site of the Tent City protests, on the site of, name your era and topic of history in the Boston area. Just go and see the actual place where it happened. It's a great feeling.
And I grew up in New York, in the Bronx, and I think many of us don't appreciate the places we grow up, and we think that nothing happened there anyway. So no matter, I think there are people who grew up here who maybe didn't appreciate it until they were older as well.
So it's interesting as we look at ComAv running through the heart of the BU campus today, and look back at ComAv running through the heart of the Auto Row almost a century ago. At the time, you would have had trolleys, streetcars coming in and out of Boston in a much wider network than we have now. At the same time, you had auto traffic going by outside the windows and people coming into the automotive dealerships. And today we have that same stretch is one of the first areas of the city to get protected bike lanes, and the green line still runs right outside with still plenty of automotive traffic, foot traffic. So it's interesting to see that though the car was king for much of the past century, there's still many modes of transportation for any healthy city.
Yeah, it's very true. When you stand in the Howard Thurman Center, the former Fuller Cadillac Oldsmobile dealership, and you look out the large windows that once gave views of the automobiles inside, looking out now, you see cars going by, green line going by, bicycles going by on the protected bike lane, lots of pedestrians. At one point, I was walking this with Sharon Brody from WBUR, taking pictures. The helicopter flew over. We couldn't quite get it in the picture, but it's been pointed out that you also have the railroad down below, which you can't quite see, and the boats going by in the river. So it really is a kind of multimodal transportation hub, and it's nice to think that while automobile history might not be made along Commonwealth Avenue anymore, transportation history is changing, and is reflected in this place that once was a mecca of the automobile in the early and mid 20th century.
Yeah, there's an old joke that the BU Bridge is the only place where you can have a plane flying over a car, driving over a train that's going over a boat.
Right. Yep.
Well, Ken, if people want to learn more about Automobile Row and they'd like to hear more from you, where can they learn more about that?
I haven't put anything myself online about Automobile Row, but when I first did this story, I did it for the new city space at WBUR, which itself is an old auto showroom. And that was recorded, and they did a nice job of video capturing it on video and putting all my slides up. So if you go to the WBUR City Space YouTube channel, you can find that presentation. And I do a lot of work about Brookline history. Not all of it has as much kind of broader impact as Automobile Row, which is more of a regional story and not just a Brookline story. But I blog at brooklinehistory.blogspot.com, and the Brookline Historical Society website at brooklinehistoricalsociety.org has many photographs and stories. And in this time of working from home, I've been turning a lot of my presentations into virtual walking tours and video presentations, and we will get those up onto our website as well. So it's I think as all of us are learning that as we're doing new things by necessity, we're also finding new ways of doing things that will be worthwhile once we're out of this crisis as well. So as I'm sure I don't have to tell you, it's such a joy doing historical research, but it's even more of a joy being able to share it with others. And that's what you do with your podcast, and that's what I do with walking tours, presentations, and a lot more online.
And assuming we're all able to gather in large groups again by July, are you still planning to present at History Camp this summer?
I am. I actually attended the very first History Camp, which I think was 7 years ago at MIT with about 85 people.
I was also there.
I missed the next two because I was away. When I came back for the fourth one, I was really astounded that it had grown to about 350 people, and I've been presenting ever since then. So as long as I'm not away when it's scheduled, I really look forward to being able to present and share what I have found and learned, and to see all the many other wonderful presentations that History Camp is able to offer.
I'll include the link to History Camp's website in the show notes this week so people can look forward to seeing you there.
Great.
Ken Liss, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us this week.
Well, thank you, Jake. It's been a pleasure.
If you'd like to learn more about Com Ave when it was still known as Automobile Row, check out this week's show notes at hubhistory.com/180. We'll have links to Ken Liss's website and his interview at WBUR CitySpace. We'll also have a wide selection of pictures from the heyday of Automobile Row. And of course, we'll have links to information about our upcoming virtual events and the Forgotten Aquariums of Boston, this week's Boston Book Club pick. If you'd like to leave us some feedback, you can email us at podcast@hubhistory.com. We're Hub History on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Or go to hubhistory.com and click on the Contact Us link. While you're on the site, hit the subscribe link and be sure that you never miss an episode. We're in all your favorite podcasting apps, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, TuneIn Radio, Player FM, and many, many more. Or you can stream the show every Sunday night at 8 p.m. on bostonfreeradio.com. You can also listen on your favorite smart speaker. If you have an Amazon Echo, you can just say, "Alexa, play the Hub History podcast." Or if you have a Google Home, you can say, "Hey Google, play the Hub History podcast."
Sure, playing the latest episode of Hub History, our favorite stories from Boston history.
Apple Podcasts is still by far the most popular podcast app. If you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, please consider writing us a brief review. If you do, drop us a line, and we'll send you a Hub History sticker as a token of appreciation. That's all for now. Stay safe out there, listeners.